All right, folks, my name is Jed, and I want to talk about some lessons I've learned from organizing Mario Kart 64 events over this past year. So, what are these events? Well, there was an online thing called a one-try league, which is basically head-to-head time trials. And then I was part of a Mario Kart 64 Versus run at Awesome Games Done Quick. And I was also the tournament organizer for PA Meet 2026, which is the largest community meetup that the Mario Kart 64 community has ever had. So 3 pretty significant things all within the past year that I was part of organizing, and I thought I'd talk about them. All right, first up is the One Try League. So the One Try League, it's an annual-ish online time trials league. This is season 8. Not sure if it's been 8 years, but it happens somewhat infrequently. And it's essentially 1v1 matches in time trials. So one player selects a track, both players race on it, and whoever sets the better time gets a point. There's a whole point then set system, and you have to win a certain number of sets to win the match. Those details aren't super important, but basically it's head-to-head time trials. There's some challenges with trying to set up this league that have been worked out through the years. The first challenge is that there's an extremely wide range in skill levels. You can't really throw any 2 players together and get a competitive match. Realistically, for any given player, there's only a handful of other players they can face where the outcome will really be in doubt. Additionally, online makes coordination harder because both players get one chance at a track and you're doing a bunch of tracks. You have to be playing at the same time. So if you have players on different continents and they have to coordinate, it's a little tricky. And because of that, players usually get a whole week to schedule their matches, which means this whole league is usually like 5 weeks or more. So people are going to run into emergencies. They're going to get stressed out or disengaged or realize they don't have enough time that they thought. And sometimes people are going to drop out. So it's a little bit tricky to get everything to work together with this many people over this long of a time frame and geographically dispersed. 2 previous formats that I was aware of. The first one is divisions. So with divisions, you break the player pool into divisions of, 5 or 6 people of roughly even skill levels, and then everybody plays everyone else within the division. And the second format is a Swiss-style format. That's a common tournament structure where it's kind of like a bracket in that winners tend to play winners and losers play losers. I'll go into it in more detail, but it's kind of like a bracket except nobody gets knocked out. So let's start talking about divisions and their pros and cons. So divisions, you've got those smaller groups broken down by skill level, so you tend to play people near your skill level, and you have opportunities for lower rated players to win their division, so you give people more chances to succeed in a way, to win a division, even if they don't win the whole thing, which is nice. Some of the cons, people can sort of end up in the wrong division. They might be better or worse than everybody else in their division and just have it be a non-competitive time the whole time. Also, if you're the top person or bottom person in your division, even if you're a little bit off, it's just like you have no competitive matches. You're either winning or losing everything. And because it's a round robin, that is, everybody plays everybody within the division. It gets weird if people drop out. It's like, oh, I beat you in one match and then you didn't play someone else. So how do we figure out what the standings should be? So it's a little bit tricky and a little bit sensitive. I mean, it's fun, but it has challenges as an organizer. So one thing they tried in the season before I joined was something known as a Swiss-style system. This is originally from chess, where I'm most familiar with it. I know it's also used in Magic the Gathering, and it's used in a lot of 2-player matches. And the basic idea is everybody starts the tournament with a clean slate, 0 points. If you win a match, you get a point, and then you end up playing players with the same number of points. So if you went 2-1, 2 wins, 1 loss in your first 3 matches, you'd go up against somebody else that was 2-1. And maybe if there's an odd number of players on a score, it's, somebody on the edge, play somebody not exactly on their score, but essentially you're playing somebody who's done equally well as you, so you end up eventually playing people around your skill level. Okay, so Swiss in other games, as I said, I'm most familiar with it from chess, and people in chess pretty much like it a lot. It's pretty good for like Magic as well, because it doesn't require super accurate seeding. It's also resilient to buys and dropouts, so if somebody needs to miss a round or if somebody leaves, it's okay because you're just matching people up near where they are in the standing, so it's not super sensitive to what exact person is there, unlike divisions. Players naturally move up or down to their skill level, so if somebody shocks you, does way better than you expected, well, they're going to win their matches, score a bunch of points, end up against other high-rated players who maybe you expected to do well. So you don't have to know ahead of time exactly how good people are. It helps, but it's not necessary. And also the later rounds tend to be competitive for everybody, no matter their skill level. Even if you're one of the lower-rated players and you lose a bunch of matches, well, you'll go up against other people who have lost matches. So you get to have some competitive games. So this was tried the year before I joined, and I thought, oh great, I know Swiss, like this is gonna go great. It's a great system. Well, in One Try League, the year they tried it, the first couple rounds were blowouts. There's a really wide range of skills in Mario Kart 64, and the better player just was winning almost all the races in the early rounds. Sometimes players would go from matches that were way too hard, playing, some of the top players, they'd lose a match, and then I was like, oh, okay, now I'm playing one of the bottom players. So they had many non-competitive matches, and for that reason it was also unpopular. I think some of it was people didn't trust or know that it would get to more competitive matches later, but also when your league's only like 5 rounds, spending 2 or 3 of them on matches that just aren't competitive, have nothing in doubt, isn't really fun. And why I think it didn't work is because there, one, weren't enough matches, but also player skill levels are really well known. We have a time trials ranking page, and your one try skill is going to be highly related to your general time trials skill. So oh, this person's rated a lot better than me, they're just going to beat me. The other aspect is one try matches have low interactivity. So in chess, for example, there was a recent thing where Hikaru Nakamura, number 2 player in the world, he just needed to get enough games to essentially maintain his rating to qualify for something. So he started playing in like all the state championships in the US, not all of them, but a number. And so he was playing way lower rated players, but all the way lower rated players were like, oh, this is awesome. I get to play one of the best players in the world and see how they play like against me. Time trials is not like that, because you're both separately doing a time trial and just saw who was better. You can't come up with an idea and see like how somebody actually plays against it, because there's not really ideas, you're just both doing a time trial. So it wasn't super popular. All right, so how do we fix this? Well, I found out that some tournaments in Go, the board game, use this thing called McMahon. And McMahon is a lot like Swiss. It's very similar, except players can start with a different number of points. So what we ended up doing was we said, all right, you're going to start if you're one of like the top 8 players based on your time trials rating. You'll get 4 points, and the next group will get 2. It might have actually been 4 divisions instead of 3. It doesn't matter. The point is, you started with more points if we expected you to do better, and this is essentially just skipping the first couple rounds of the Swiss system. And you know what? If it turned out somebody was much better or worse at one try league than their time trials, they could still, rise or fall through the ranks and end up next to people who they were competitive. But for the vast majority of people, this just allowed them to skip the early rounds where they weren't getting competitive matches. So we got a lot more competitive games from the beginning. As part of this, we did have, I think we had 8 people in that top division. So after 2 rounds, you get 2 people who are on a perfect score, and then they play each other. And we had like 5 rounds total. So we ended up putting those same 2 top players against each other in round 3 and round 5 because, they both were winning all their games except against each other. And that's kind of just the nature of the skill levels in Mario Kart 64. Like, it would have been silly to insist that they play 2 lower rated players who they'd probably destroy. And those top 2 players actually use this to decide like who would get the advantage of having a first pick later on in the tournament phase of this tournament, because we did the Swiss, and then I'll talk about this. We did playoffs right after it where we took the top 4 and put them into like a mini bracket. So players came up with a little bit of their own stakes and meaning from their matches as well, because they knew that they were doing something special, those top 2. Anyway, so people like the playoffs. It kind of adds some final stakes to it, and you can say that you won your 4-person playoff even if you did less well than you expected. Again, another chance for players to define what success means for them. Also, just as a note, I totally messed up one of the brackets. I forget exactly what happened. I think I just forgot to add someone, or somebody had said that they weren't going to be available for the playoffs, and like I put them in. I think that's what it was. So I put them in, and then somebody pointed out that they weren't available. So then I had 3 people in our bracket, and I was like we could reseed you, or maybe you have another idea. And I'm glad I asked if they had another idea, because that player just said, hey, why don't we just do a round robin with the 3 of us? And that's a lot easier to do with 3 people then, because it's 3 matches versus doing like however many it is with a round robin of 5 or 6. Anyway, if you make a mistake in a tournament and organization, sometimes the best thing to do is just be upfront, ask players what they want to do. You gotta be a little careful with this, because you still need to be fair, and just because somebody wants something doesn't mean that that's the fair thing to do. But in this case, the solution of just having those 3 players play each other made a lot of sense. All 3 players were in agreement that made sense. And one of the reasons I say to be cautious, though, is because you don't want to reward people for being disagreeable. If somebody says, no, I don't want to do this, or if somebody says, oh, I'd really like to do this, or no, I don't want to do this, just because they're outspoken doesn't mean they should get an advantage in anything. But you should also listen if people are in agreement that this makes sense and it seems like a fair rule. It's a casual tournament, there's no money on the line, so go ahead and do what makes your players happy, I would say, generally. Use some judgment, though. Yeah, so the lessons from this one, I think, were listens to your players about what they care the most about. Like, I don't think absolutely nobody said, oh, we want to do a McMahon tournament or anything like that. But they did say, hey, we're unhappy with Swiss. And it was clear that the reason they were unhappy with Swiss was they were not getting competitive matches. And as organizers were like, hey, we're not super happy with divisions. Sometimes you'd have people be unhappy about being stuck in the wrong division. And McMahon was the solution to both of those problems and was well received. And that's one of the general lessons is people often can't tell you what the fix is, but they can usually tell you what the problem, what's making them unhappy, and you might need to use some judgment to figure out the underlying reason for that and actually address it. But don't ignore people. Like, if people are unhappy, they're unhappy. And when you're dealing with a lot of people, sometimes a few of them are going to be unhappy, and you just have to kind of be like, shrug about it. But if a lot of people are unhappy with your format, you really should consider what's going wrong there and if you can make a change. All right, the second event I want to talk about is Awesome Games Done Quick. Awesome Games Done Quick is a speedrunning event, so you have a lot of people showing off games and how quickly they can play them. It is an annual event, and it was based here in Pittsburgh for 3 years from 2024 to 2026. It's been in other cities before and will be in other cities after this. And they choose from all sorts of games, show them off, and it also raises a bunch of money for charity. Basically, as people are playing, they encourage people to donate, and it's really a great cause. I think it went to the Prevent Cancer Foundation or for Awesome Games Done Quick, and then in the summer they have another one that goes to Doctors Without Borders, I believe. So there's an online submission process because a lot of people want to be in this event. And after PA Meet 2024, I was like, hey, this is a really exciting thing. We don't see many things like this at Awesome Games Done Quick because even if you have people racing video games, they're usually playing separately and just saying who can do it in less time. And you don't get the interactivity like you have in Mario Kart. So I was interested in doing it, but I didn't know how to actually do a submission because I couldn't figure out how to get 4 people in an online match to actually play the game so that we could submit video of it. And then within the intervening year, I learned about online play. There's a thing called Kylera, which is an online client where people can play against each other. So a couple days before the submission deadline, I was talking to Brody, who you will hear more about in the PA Meet section. And I reached out to all of the previous year's PA Meet finalists and said, hey, I'm interested in this. Would you want to do a submission? I don't know whether we'll get in, but I'd like to try. And they all said, yeah, we can try. They weren't all sure if they would be able to make it to the event or if we would get in. But I figured, hey, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's just give it a shot. So I was very busy. It was only a couple days before the deadline. So what we ended up doing was they did a match against each other. They recorded it without any mics or anything. And then they sent me the video and I did a live commentary over it. Live commentary in quotes there because it wasn't as it happened, but it was blind commentary. I had no idea what was going to happen in the match. And then I made sure to read over the submission guidelines and try to follow them pretty closely. So explaining tricks and techniques and having timestamps for tricks so that it was easy to review. My goal is to make the submission as easy as possible for the reviewers to follow and understand and get the relevant information. Make it easy for them to accept me. Show that I'm easy to work with, right? And I think part of this was also I tried to understand what I brought to the table because Games Done Quick has to choose between a lot of different possible submissions. And I think the major things were Mario Kart is a popular franchise, so it will probably get eyeballs on the stream if it's playing. It's a unique and, in my opinion, exciting format. There's not a lot of head-to-head races where players interact in the speedrunning community, and it's way more exciting and closer than you might expect if you haven't watched it before. And also, PA Meet takes place in Pittsburgh every year, and AGDQ was in Pittsburgh too. So, and I live here in Pittsburgh as well. So that wasn't a major point of it, but it was something special to me, and I think is kind of a nice connection. One thing that I wasn't doing was being like, oh, I really want to do games done quick, because everybody who submits wants to do games done quick. I'm sure they love that, but it's not really a selling point. It's not a reason for them to select you. It's a reason for you to accept. So you want to sell yourself in a way that differentiates you from other people who are submitting. All that is to say, it's kind of a bit of crapshoot. You don't know what they want, what other submissions there are, but we got accepted. And we found out that we were accepted, or I did at least, when I landed in Seoul, South Korea after like a 14 or 15 hour flight because I didn't have any Wi-Fi on the plane. So I was like jet lagged and it was crazy. But I was really excited. I was on this vacation though, and I didn't have data on my phone. I just had to use the hotel Wi-Fi mostly. And one of the things it taught me was that I could get stuff done on a limited time because I didn't have a lot of time to like worry and stress out about this because I just wanted to enjoy my vacation. So I would just fire off messages occasionally and try to address things, but I really didn't want to spend a ton of time on this during my vacation, so I didn't. Players suggested that we bring in a co-commentator, and I'll be frank, this is not something I thought of when I was doing the submissions. I had previously done like finals commentary at PA Meet, so whenever I was thinking about doing commentary, I was like, yeah, I can do it. But I had to kind of say, okay, take a step back. Like, would having a co-commentator be good? Yeah, probably. Like, it's not about me. It's about showing Mario Kart 64 off, and it's always easier to do commentary with someone else. So I had to let it not just be my baby and be like, no, I'm doing it, and just say like, okay, yeah, this is a good idea. And I ended up going with Super Denny, who I had talked to before. I wasn't super familiar with their commentary in the past, but everybody spoke highly of them, and I watched some of it and was like, okay, yes, this will work. So one thing that we talked about, Denny and I, was who is the audience? Like, how do we want to form our commentary for this? And the main thing for me was this is not a Mario Kart event. This is Awesome Games Done Quick. So the audience is people who are interested in gaming, maybe interested in speed running, but they don't know much about Mario Kart 64 specific strategies or tech, or the competitive scene in Mario Kart. And because of that, my focus was always on making sure the commentary is accessible and explains the basics, and even some of the things beyond basics, but it's tailored to somebody who is watching a match for a first time, not the Mario Kart 64 experts. So that was very specifically like, my audience is not the Mario Kart 64 people, even though I want them to watch and enjoy it. It's tailored to the 99.9% of people watching this who did not know about this competitive scene beforehand. So before we did the match in Pittsburgh, I wanted to do a lot of co-commentary practice with Super Denny, and they were also down. We spent a lot of time talking. And we had to be mindful of what would it be like when we're on stage there. So we had to try to be concise, not do a long intro, not do a long outro. Also, there's donations during the event, and there will be a host who is reading off donations. So we had to think about, okay, what times might be good for those, because you don't want them to be reading donations during like really important parts during the match, but they don't necessarily know when those points are. So you have to leave time for them to explicitly carve out time for them to read donations, unless you're okay with them butting in at inopportune times potentially. Especially since in a racing game, it's like non-stop live commentary for a lot of it. In any case, I sort of wrote up a script hitting the highlights of what I wanted to talk about and the specific details. And then we did a number of practice rounds where we would watch old competitive matches that had been posted to YouTube. We would mute it, just get on Discord or a call, do our own commentary and see what worked and what didn't. And we would get suggestions and revise things and see what our dynamics were, what we were more comfortable covering versus having the other person cover. And we also, Rainbow Road is a very long race in Mario Kart 64. It's about 6 minutes. So we had some set out, carved out time to do like speeches during that. But, you know, if you're talking off the cuff, it is hard to hit everything you want to say within a minute. A minute both sounds like a long time, is actually pretty short if you don't know what you're going to say beforehand. All right, so we practice. Everybody comes to Pittsburgh. The day of, we are a bonus game, so we're not actually like guaranteed to be in the schedule. There is a $64,000 incentive for Mario Kart 64, where they need to get enough donations put towards our game in order for us to do it. However, they are very mindful of the fact that people are coming in and sacrificing to be here. And they're actually quite good at setting the donation limits at something that is high enough to incentivize people to donate, but still low enough that they're essentially always met. So people were nervous about it not getting met, including me a little bit, but also I was confident that it would be met, pretty confident, and also in our preparation. So it was just sort of like, okay, we just gotta wait and do it. And I think we did like a practice round beforehand as well. But it's just sort of like, we just gotta wait. We'll go up. We'll be set. It's gonna be a good match no matter what happens, I think. So the runs before us went a little bit long. Like the schedule slipped a little bit during the day, which is pretty common in a speedrunning marathon. I think we were supposed to go on around like 7-ish and ended up going on around 9. So nothing ridiculous, but it just added a little bit to the anxiety of the day that it was a little later, but it wasn't a huge deal. So we got set up. They have 2 kind of stages side by side with a curtain in the middle. So one game is playing on the left side, and we end up getting set up on the right side, and the incentive actually got met while we were being set up there. So you can see that they were confident it would be met, otherwise they wouldn't set us up, but like we did not know 100% that we were going on until very shortly beforehand. And then this is kind of what the match looked like. So initially they had like one couch and in the center, and then they had a chair on either side, and they wanted the 4 players on the couch and Denny and I on either side. But because we had practiced commentary like with each other, and we kind of wanted to go off each other's vibes and body language and whatnot, we said, hey, is it okay if like we sit together? Is there a way we can do that? And if there wasn't, you know, we would have made it work, but they brought out like another couch and just reset it up to look like this. Also, just shout out to all the players here, everybody. So you can see left to right, we got Denny, you got me, Cheech, and then in the video it's Haddock, now goes by Vic Vaylor online, then Wah, and Pokermon. So it was a really great match. There were is more exciting than any of the practice matches we did. It was incredible, and the fact that we got to do it up on stage was awesome. So the match itself, as I said, ton of close races. You could see the crowd in that picture. They were incredible. They were going crazy for everything. The actual process of doing commentary was pretty smooth. I got thrown off just a little bit because of the donations. So we had times between races where donations were being read, and in my mind, it's a speed run thing. So usually gameplay keeps going. So I was like, oh, we gotta go. But the Vic was like pausing and letting them do commentary, and I think the first time I was like, come on, let's go. And then after that I realized it wasn't a thing. Like, we're more of a showcase than a speed run is how they define it. It was actually fine for us to take the pause so that they could do commentary and then we could like focus on gameplay. So that's just one of the things. Like, in other scenarios, I would say practice exactly like the scenario you're going to be in, but we didn't know, like, GDQ is not going to set aside time for us to practice in the exact same format as the host. So we had to simulate it as best as we could, and it was a little bit different. So you just gotta like roll with it to a extent. In the end, the match ended up being a tie between Cheech and Wah. And we had discussed tiebreakers beforehand and what we wanted to do, because we didn't want to be on stage and be like, oh, like, how does this work out? We decided against doing any sort of tiebreaker. And primarily that's because we can't just say, oh, we'll do like another race to decide who wins, because it's GDQ's time, it's not our time. And I didn't want to do some sort of statistical tiebreaker where I'm like, oh, the scores are the same, but actually because one player won more races beforehand, it like doesn't matter. You know, if somebody came back, but like they lost on the statistical tiebreaker. I wanted there to be a hype high moment at the end if something happened. So that's what we ended up doing, and that's what, you know, all the players said that they were good with, because it's a showcase. If it was a tournament, we would decide a winner, but it wasn't. That wasn't the point of this event. There was a really positive reception to everything. People told us the commentary was great, that the match was exciting. I think we had like 50,000 live viewers and 50,000-ish on the video afterwards. Yeah, it was an awesome experience. Really happy that I got to do that in Pittsburgh in front of the home crowd. So, what lessons did I learn from GDQ? I think one of the big ones is take big swings. There's no, if you apply to something and you don't get in, you know, the only thing you've lost is the time you put into the application. So be realistic. You know, I think there's different years or different events where we wouldn't have got in. We got into this one for whatever reason, and I think that we had a decent chance to get in for the reasons I highlighted above. But hey, we like had a couple days to decide to do this, and I just said, let's do it. Let's take a shot. And yeah, it was an awesome experience. So take big swings. Like, if the reward's big and the cost is low, just go for it. Next, I would say understand your role in something. In the online space, I know a lot of people want to be like the next big name in whatever way, but be easy to work with is what I would say. So like GDQ is mindful, you know, they'll put your name up and like links to your socials and stuff. But I feel like in general, make sure that you are contributing to something, and that's the primary thing. Like, people want people who will help put on a good event and will continue to want to work with you if you're contributing, and they'll usually be happy to shout you out or whatever. But if you go in and it's clear that your main goal is just like to get clout for yourself, people kind of shy away from that. I would also say surround yourself with people you can work with. Obviously, we had 6 people up there on stage, and also some other people who like contributed behind the scenes. Yeah, so that is kind of a high pressure situation going up on stage, trying to get everybody to the same city, and knowing that these are people you can work with and get things done with is great. Also, I had a great time with everybody there. Just as a general comment, people you can work with and people who are your friends are not necessarily the same things. It's obviously easier if you personally get along with people, but sometimes it's like, hey, I need somebody for this particular task, and somebody else is good at it, and you don't have to be buddy buddy with them to acknowledge their contributions and let them help you. And also, sometimes you have friends who aren't good at things, and you have to make a judgment call on what your actual goal is. And yeah, that can be tough on big projects, but make sure that you have a good team on whatever you're doing. I would also say have a vision. People will have all sorts of opinions on how to do a big project of yours, and you should, of course, listen to feedback. But for example, we had 50,000 viewers, and there might be comments in the Twitch chat of, oh, I like this, I didn't like this. It's like, okay, if 1 or 2 people say something out of 50,000, that's not actually feedback. You shouldn't overreact to each little thing. Now, if it seems like it's a very consistent comment from a lot of different people, you can think about it. But I think have a vision. Ask yourself, what is it that you want to do? That was the other thing applying to GDQ, is I was like, I hadn't applied to GDQ before because my goal was never, well, I thought it would be fun to be on GDQ, but I was like, what can I bring to this? I don't want to be on there just to be on there. I want to be at GDQ to show something that I'm passionate about and share. If I'm going to get this opportunity, I want to make it mean something. Also, roll with the punches. Like, things are going to get a little weird at times, like with the setup, or like having to wait for incentives, or anything. Just like, the show must go on, and be prepared for things to go a little bit wrong, but you're more prepared, you can handle more situations, and just be comfortable knowing, hey, I've done what I can, and we couldn't control how good of a match it was going to be, and we happened to get a great one. We might have gotten a blowout or a runaway, but I think you just have to be okay with that. Also, I would say generally, like, don't assume things like this are going to be your big break or anything. I've mentioned how many viewers we got. I don't think I got any subscribers out of this. I think we had like 2 people join the Mario Kart 64 Discord and ask about how they could get involved in verses. I don't know if any of them followed up and actually managed to ever play a versus match with anyone, because nobody joined the online versus community, which is quite small. Somebody might have joined the time trial site or like been inspired by it, but don't assume it's your big break just because you got into like one thing. It has less of an impact than you might think. All right, and then finally, I want to talk about PA Meet 2026. So this was the largest Mario Kart 64 community meet up ever. I think we had like 42 people. To be clear, this was an in-person event, so people came from all over the country. We had a number of people come from overseas as well, from England and Croatia. So it's complicated, it's big. I was the tournament director for this, and helped out with Brody, who's the main organizer. And I had also done this the previous year, so we made some changes. we had to like track player signups and interest and all of that, and also handle tech because the person who was handling our tech the previous year was not here this year. So let's see. One of the things we changed was we moved the deadline up several weeks compared to 2025. In 2025, didn't know the final player count until like a week or two before the actual event, which made figuring out the tournament format fairly stressful. Also, as part of this, we made a big spreadsheet that just had each person and then like, have they said they're interested? Are they, like what sort of percentage would we put on that? Have they paid their deposit? Have they done their final payment? Just sort of a bunch of stuff so that we could see who's definitely in, who's definitely out, who's on the fence, so that we could get a sense of how many attendees we would have. And also, I think as you get larger, you have to be a bit more formal just for your own sanity and for organization. Like, this year, it was just, hey, we got to know our player count earlier. I think we did have a couple people who said, hey, can I sign up after a deadline? And we had to say no, because if you don't stick to your deadlines, they aren't actually deadlines. So, but hopefully those people can make it next year and we can have, an even bigger event with more community members. Delegation. Delegation is important. I wish I had done more of it, to be quite honest. So this was sort of our tech crew for the event. Cheech made a lot of the on-screen graphics. Denny did the internet. Vic did the stream setup, and we had lots of volunteers as well. Putting up tables. Walt volunteered his laptop, to do recordings as well. So yeah, let people help you. It's a really big event, and if you are feeling overwhelmed with how much you're doing, like, let things out of your control a little bit. Find somebody else in the community you trust to help out. Brody has let me take on the tournament stuff, which I'm interested in. He continues to do a lot of the event and like outreach and venue stuff, which I have very little interest in doing. So let people who are interested in things help you out. It adds some complexity, but you can't do very large events all on your own. The tournament format. So the prelims, we did 8 rounds of 4 tracks to determine seeding. And then we would go on to the knockout, where players would be grouped together in 4-person groups, and they would play all the tracks and earn points. And then the top 2 out of the 4 players would move on, and the bottom 2 would get eliminated. The changes we made this year to the tournament, we simplified the tracks for the prelims. In previous years, we had done random tracks essentially for each group, and this year we just said, okay, you're going to be, because it's a grid of tracks, it's 4x4. So we said, okay, you're doing this. You're doing Mushroom Cup. You're doing the 4 tracks in one column, or you're doing this row, and everybody in the same round. Round 1 was Mushroom Cup for everyone. Round 2 was Flower Cup for everyone. So we made it simpler, and also that meant that like it was easy to play all of the tracks twice. We also, I think, had some better communication on certain things. I brought my TV, and I was showing the standings up on the TV during the prelims, and then during the knockout round, we managed to hook up the stream computer to my TV so that people could see what was happening on stream, like kind of behind where people were actually playing. So if you didn't have a good view of the TV that people were playing on, you could see this other TV and see what was happening as well. For tech, we had some challenges. We had more setups than the previous year, and we also wanted to do a secondary stream. This took a bit to figure out. We did get it done. I might have overcomplicated it. I think the big thing was the venue that we were at does not have dedicated internet, and we essentially ran out of bandwidth on a hotspot the previous year. So people wanted a different internet solution, and I was stressing out about that for a while. But Denny suggested that we use a Starlink that they had access to. So we ended up going with that. I wasn't 100% confident it would work, but it worked great, and it was a decent portion of the budget actually. But it was only a couple dollars per person, and it really offloaded a lot of mental effort for me, which freed me up to actually focus on running the tournament, which I think was a great trade-off to make. Making the prelims good enough. So if you don't know me, I was a math major. I really like tournaments, if you haven't realized that yet. I like these nice underlying theories and structures and trying to make everything balanced and how do things fit together. And yeah, I had to give up on that just a little bit. I still did a lot of it, but there's this website, goodenoughgolfers.com, that can help with making groups. And we had enough people that worked well. I also think that if you're making a tournament, it is just as important to have your tournament be understood and accepted by your players and viewers as it is for it to have like a solid underlying theory. You can have a great tournament structure with like a lot of complicated ideas behind it, but if your players don't understand it, they're going to be dissatisfied. So I think you really can simplify things and just say, hey, like this is a reasonable way to do it, and people will accept it. Like, we're not professionals. I think even professionals, this is good advice for them. But when you especially when you have a community event, people will accept that, hey, this makes sense. I also posted a lot about like what the format would be and tried to solicit feedback before the event, which is actually why I made some of these changes. People said the previous years was a little bit too confusing. So yeah, we simplified, and I think those were good changes. Did I talk about... Oh, I don't think I talked about the waterfall bracket. So previous years, we did something where it was just, we'd do the seedings and then everybody would start in the first round, except for like a couple people who got buys. But that means that your top seed faces your bottom seed in the first round as you set up brackets. This is sometimes called slaughter pairings or groupings in tournaments. And those are really uncompetitive and kind of boring matches. So instead, I took a page out of Smash Bros tournaments, and these are called waterfall brackets, where you get one group of players enters in a round. So I think we had like 16 players in the first round, and then we had the 16 lowest points essentially in the first round, and then we had the next 8 players that scored higher than them got a bye to the next round, and then the top 8 players got a bye to the round above that. There might have been another round in there somewhere. Anyway, but what this does is it means the very top players get buys to later on, so they're incentivized to play really well during the prelims, and also they don't have to enter until they're actually facing competition that would be potentially tough for them, or at least competitive, who have a shot. And then the lower rated players get to play players who are around their skill level. So instead of just being like in the bottom half and getting eliminated immediately, it's okay. Some bottom players do get eliminated immediately, but they're probably in a closer match, score more points than they would against a top player. And then some of those lower rated players get a chance to win a match, move on to a second match, face a little bit harder competition. Maybe they get knocked out there, but at least they were able to have success in moving on from one round to the next. So more people at least qualify from a match, even though the end standings are the same, if that makes sense. All right. The actual tournament or event day. Things started going a little bit wrong. Setup took longer than expected. I think that's just on me. I thought we would get it done in time. The previous year was also longer than expected, and I just thought that there were reasons for it that wouldn't happen again, but then there were other reasons this year. So we just need to set aside more time for setup. Players were not there when I expected them to be there. I told everyone to be there at a certain time. A lot of them weren't, but then it was delayed getting started, so it was kind of okay. But I think we need to consider if we need to change the start time to be realistic about when players are showing up. There's also the fact that sometimes players just, whatever time you tell them, people are going to show up like at that time or adjusted from that time. So whatever, we'll figure it out. But I think with so many people coming in and like wanting to hang out and maybe party with their friends the night before, doing an early morning start is rough for some people. So maybe starting in the afternoon on that day would be easier. There were a few dropouts from the tournament. This is something I had actually anticipated and had written into the rules and my standing sheet of how to handle, because somebody had needed to drop out late the year before. So I'd say be prepared for dropouts. They happen less often in in-person events than they do in online events, but it can be tricky to handle depending on the format of your tournament. So it's a good thing to think about. We had a CRT crash in a way that's a little bit more literal than you might expect. The tables at the venue, a lot of them had kind of like wobbly or weird legs. I thought I had checked all the tables before the event, but I must have missed one because somebody was adjusting a table and the leg folded in. It was one of those folding tables, and the CRT just went and fell forward. Fortunately, the person whose CRT it was very chill about it. They said that it was their least favorite CRT anyway. But that was, and people cleaned it up quickly. But that was, of course, like a stressful moment. We had a player in the venue who pulled their Achilles. This happened almost simultaneously with the CRT crashing. I am so frazzled from that day. I'm not sure exactly when I actually found out about this, but I was essentially told that this person was injured, and the person who was talking to me, said that they thought it was an Achilles injury and that somebody had kind of looked at it. We didn't have medical professionals. I don't think that we handled it well as organizers, because my sort of thought was, okay, sounds like this is not, life-threatening. Somebody with more medical experience than me is on scene, and I don't think that my presence, since I'm not like friends or know this person super well, would improve things for them. I think as an organizer, I should have taken on more responsibility there to say, like, hey, you're having a medical incident. What can we do to help? Do you need somebody to take you to urgent care or the ER? So I think their friends did handle it and get it addressed, but I think that was a failing on the organization's part at that point. And I mean, as one of the organizers, I take responsibility for that as well. So I think when you're holding an in-person event, especially as it gets larger, you need to think about like, oh, what might you actually need to deal with as you have more and more people on the same site. Like, what happens if somebody shows up who didn't sign up? We had to discuss that this year, which fortunately was not a big issue because they were essentially just passing through and we were okay with that. But, like, yeah, security, health, those sorts of things are complicated. And the more people you have, the more likely that is to be an issue. But it's also hard because it's like we're just a couple guys trying to put on an event. We don't necessarily have the skills in this, but it's something you should think about. Things were there was a lot of chaos. Also, there was just the chaos of, hey, we're trying to get through a bunch of matches. Like, how do we get the 4 people who need to play right now to something? And that was a lot of like yelling out names and trying to find people. And I think we can do a more organized way of doing that in the future. Yeah. That being said, things started going right after things went wrong. Things calmed down. We got through prelims. We had some buffer time built into the schedule, so even though we ran into these issues, we never felt like we would be unable to finish the tournament. Especially since we were using 2 streams this year. That meant that we could do multiple matches at once and save on time if we fell behind. Additionally, the crowd in the community was awesome, and it was just really great to hang out with the community, and everybody was very appreciative of the work that we were doing. So that really felt great, and is one of the reasons why I like doing this. Like the tournament stuff, but I have done stuff before where it's like I put in a lot of work for this, not for the money, but because it's something I'm passionate about and because I like the game a lot, and the community supporting and like acknowledging that helps make it worthwhile for me. So I appreciate the community doing that a lot. Lessons we learned from this. One of them is simplify things. Like, you should be able to explain things quickly to everyone. It's easy to assume when you are really into tournament stuff that, like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is a good way to do it. But the simpler you can explain things, probably the better. Also, simplify things for your own life by delegating more. Yes, it adds a little bit of logistical complexity and you kind of have to trust people, but there's a limit to how much you can do, and you are always going to assume you can do more than you actually can because, I mean, that's just human nature. You procrastinate or you've got 5 things coming up at once, and just let somebody else, if you trust they can do it, like, do it. Or like bring on somebody who you can like kind of mentor and explain how you did things, and then ask if they're interested in helping. Like One Try League, Jumbo, who was running it the previous year, asked me if I could help out, and then this year Jumbo decided not to run it, so I'm probably going to be running it with Vic Vaylor this year. Like, just get help with things. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Yeah. Treat big event seriously. Like, as I said before, this is one thing people don't really think about, I think, when starting an event, but do you have a plan if there's a medical emergency? Do you have insurance? Like, you might think, oh, I don't need insurance because, nobody would sue me. The big thing is, it's not necessarily their choice. Like, if you get catastrophically injured at something, right, and your medical insurance pays pays for your medical bills, now that insurance company, because they've had to pay out, they have damages, and they can essentially sue based on who they think is responsible for those damages. So if you invite your friend to something and they get really badly injured and have medical bills, even if they wouldn't sue you, their insurance company could potentially sue you. Um, maybe I'm paranoid about things, but I think that's a thing to consider. Um, yeah. Anyway, give people downtime as well. My thought process is like, oh, this is a tournament. How big can we make this tournament? How much gameplay can we get into it? But people also just want to like hang out and socialize at these events. Um, so I think actually making the tournament smaller might be the way to go in the future. I'm going to think about that. Um, Part of simplifying things was making people pay earlier. And I think next year, instead of having the number of signups and then like splitting it out between everyone, we're probably just going to say, hey, pay this much by this date. If we get extra money, we'll, refund a couple bucks to everybody that they overpaid. But instead of having people pay like, $28.14, just say, hey, everybody needs to pay like 30, 35 bucks. And then that makes it pretty clear we'll have enough. And then you can send back the $2 or the $7 or whatever it is. I think that's pretty reasonable. And then goals for the future, be more community focused. Brody and I talked a lot about, hey, we have 40 people, and Dan, who won EA Meet, gave a lovely speech and said, I want to see more people out here. Like, can we get to 50 next year? And I mentally was like, haha, like, there's no way we're getting to 50. And I was like, oh, wait, we went from like 20, 25 people to 42 in a year or two. Like, yeah, we could actually get to 50, especially since we're bringing in other parts of the community. So we have a question here. Do we want to get more and more serious about streaming and organized and make this a tournament? Is that the focus? Or do we want to keep it a little bit more casual of a community event? And I think we can have the tournament as well, but it's like, what direction do we want to take this? And the answer we agreed on was we want this to be more community focused than tournament, than like an event. We're not trying to make this the next big thing. It's growing because people enjoy being here, but let's try to make it for the community. All right. Wrap up, overarching themes for the year. I would say one of the big things is know who your audience is, who your player base is, and that's, like when you're putting on an event, you have a vision, but presumably you're doing this not just for yourself, because people don't show up to things that they don't find interesting or like. So ask yourself, all right, who also has a stake in this, and how can I make this a good thing for them? I would also say keep expectations reasonable. I was a software engineer for a long time, and it was kind of the idea that if you make something, people tend to expect what they've seen. So if you treat something incredibly seriously, and like every single detail is major, then people will treat it like that. And if you say like, hey, these are the rules, we're going to stick with them, but then when things come up, kind of like, okay, how do you want to do things? Like, what seems fair? Or like if things go wrong, just say like, hey, we're sorry, like what's going to happen here? People kind of treat you with the same energy you treat them. And the easiest way to like make things lower stressed is not to be super stressful and addict to people, I would say. Also make things as simple as possible, including for yourself. People who are stressed out make worse decisions. That's just like, there's a lot of science in supporting that. So make things simple for yourself and let people help you, because it's important, I think. And finally, prioritize. And what I mean by this, I have a little bit of mixed feelings, because I think when I hear prioritize, I'm so used to people being like, oh, like optimize your corporate journey, your career ladder, like whatever. Your priority can be like, I want to put on a good Mario Kart event. It's fine. But what are the aspects that are the most beneficial, and like what details do you really care about? Is it super important for you to come up with the math theory of it, or would you rather just simplify things and like make things easier for your players? And you can kind of do both. Like I made a big video about the math of the tournament last year, and then this year I simplified and focused on the players. But ask yourself, if you're really stressing about something, ask yourself what is really the impact. Because we had some internet issues in the past, and this year it was just sort of like, okay, we'll do 2 streams. We'll try to record everything. We lost a couple of videos. It's just sort of like you do what you can, and you try to put on a good event. And you know what? If something happens to the stream or whatnot, the people there are having fun. They're playing the tournament. So that's the important thing. The community and the people who are there are way more important than getting the stream. Yeah. So those are sort of my lessons. This was a little long and rambly, but it was just something I wanted to get done today. I've been talking about making a video about all the stuff I've done for Mario Kart in the past year. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or ideas for your own events that you're putting on, like, let me know. And I'm interested in sharing my thoughts if you're interested. Also, yeah, I'm just interested in continuing to do stuff with the Mario Kart community and try not to stress out about it, because it's a racing game. It's fun. It should be fun. If you're doing stuff like this and you find that it's no longer fun, if something's no longer fun and you're not getting paid for it, like, ask yourself, why are you doing it? Because ideally, if you're doing something as a hobby, you should be enjoying it. And I've gotten a lot of like really real satisfaction out of contributing to the community this past year. So that's what I get out of it. Yeah. All right. I think that's basically it. Cool. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.